the lovely, the amazing, the fabulous Yonina Curtin.
Okay, now I'm blushing. Oh my goodness, but I am here and I'm happy to be here. And I am coming to you from New Westminster, the same places that Janet had mentioned earlier. So land of the Kakite Nation and many other Coast Salish nations use this land. It's been a real honor to be a judge, a lot of work. We got 100 submissions. That's a lot of books to look at and to consider. I was quite freaked out, to be honest with you, at the beginning because, first I do the yes, no, maybe kind of piles. And the yes and maybes were really big. So there was a lot of wonderful, wonderful collections. And it got hard, really hard for me to figure out, well, how will I make a determination? And in some cases, it feels like you're comparing apples to oranges because they're different styles. So as a judge, I also had to consider conflict of interest. So I know many of the people that were on the list and some that that were submitted and some that are on the list. It's very difficult to negotiate that space when you've been in the writing world for a while and you know people. So I had to sort of come to some conclusions, and Janet and I talked greatly. So I want to really thank her for her time that she spent sort of figuring out with me, what would be okay, what would not be okay, and in terms of conflict of interest, in terms of how I would come to this decision. And I decided in the end that I needed to stay with what I love most. And so I'm the judge. I really love narrative poetry. So you probably will notice in the top 10, there's a lot of narrative poetry in here. And so I then had to really hone in on another criteria, which I will mention later. And that helped me to come to a determination. It was not easy. So I'd like to start with the first, with listing out the top 10. And this will be in alphabetical order. And I'd like to say something about each book, because I think everyone deserves a moment here, because these were wonderful collections. And we poets know that these moments don't come often enough. So we write, and it sometimes feels like things just kind of go into the ethers. We don't know what happens after that. Sometimes we don't get much feedback. Sometimes we don't get many reviews. There's a whole lot of stuff that you sort of feel like, okay, I don't know if people like that or not. Or they give you, I really liked your book. It doesn't really help me to know what did you like and why. So I will start with the first book in alphabetical order. It's The Responsive Weeds, A Misplacement of Black Poetry on the Prairies, Bertrand Bickersteth. Excuse me if I mispronounce any names. This book blew me away. First off, I'm from the prairies, so born in Manitoba, Métis, and I was just right away drawn to the fact that it was a narrative about the poetries, about provinces that I love and that I have relatives in. I have relatives in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. And so this book, like many of the books in the top 10, are debut collections. And it explores what does it mean to be Black from the prairies. Minister Faust, the author of Shrinking Heroes, offered this testimonial. Bertrand Bickersteth is our wayfarer. His verse, finely hewn, glitters with light that both dazzles and burns. He is the canlit I never got to experience in all my time in school and university. It's a remarkable collection, and I actually have been rereading it. So congratulations for being on the top 10. And next comes Canticles 2. Now again, 2020, MMXX. I had to look that up because it's been so long since I used Roman numerals. I was like, what does that mean? I know it's about time, so it's 2020. George Eliot Clark, Guernica Editions. Well, what can I say about this collection? It's so beyond anything I could ever write myself. And Joel Dusolet said this in a review that he offered in the Canadian Literature, a quarterly of criticism and review. Clark describes the book as a conjured Africadian Bible, but qualifies that one will be careful not to read it as if it were the Bible. Clark's reflections on his adaptation of sacred texts imply that this book seeks versions of the truth. Again, another remarkable book. And our next one, We Shed Our Skin Like Dynamite, Conyer Clayton. How I love the title of this book. I was quite struck by it. I'm like, oh, wow. So the title suggests this, as the title does suggest, this collection is not gentle, and yet it is healing because it is freeing, filled with unpredictable turns that offer an inside look at what most of us hide about our addictions and codependence, sex, and death. It's gritty and raw in all the best possible ways. And next we have Body Count, Kyla Jameson. This is such a tender collection. Emma Healy offered this feedback on the back cover blurb. The poems in Body Count's first half cycle through a kaleidoscope of daily desires and frustrations, blazing crushes, sharp encounters with misogyny, building an inventory of a swift moving mind. Then halfway through, a concussion prompts a change of pace. I have to say that I found the boldness of letting that second half just be what it was really thrilling. I think that we need to see what happens for people and expose what happens when there are chronic illnesses, injuries, things like that, that really shift our lives. And I think that this collection really showed that. And then we come to Field Notes for the Self, Randy Lundy. This is not a fast read. It takes some time. I really had to pay full attention. And Lundy moves you through time, the land, and teachings from many disciplines. It's a book filled with hard-won wisdom. One of my favorite poets, Sherwin Bitsu of the Navajo Nation, says, "This book is ceremony, offering readers as often startling but necessary glimpse of our changing world." It's a book that you really do want to spend time with, and it's not that you would just go through it. Some collections of poetry, you can just pick it up, read it straight through. This one for me, I needed to sit with what was being offered and unpack the complexities that were being offered, woven together, all sorts of disciplines. It's wonderful. Wash's Praise, Nor Nega. And again, I apologize if I mispronounce any names. This book was a winner of the RBC Bronwyn Wallace Award. The jury had this to say about the book: exhilarating, mile-a-minute prose poems that are fresh, provocative, and often funny. These visceral pieces take surprising hairpin turns, pulling the reader through proclamations, inquiries, and bursts of self-doubt. Nornega achieves all this with a language that is rich and sensory and a visually rigid structure that counterintuitively unfolds to allow a multiplicity of pacing and play. And I would agree 100% with that. And next we have Tablet Fragments, Tamar Rubin. In this book, the author explores the fragments that exist in her own life. The poems about a broken marriage left me feeling like I finally understood the complexity of the back and forth feelings I recall experiencing. Rubin is a physician and through poetry explores the challenges of the medical world and cultural identity. The questions that she asks stay with you. Jordan Abel had this to say about the collection. Rubin's gift as a poet is inscribing lines that both create fractures and connect the much like the fragments, much like the tablet fragments that center the book. Beautiful collection again. So the next book is It Was Never Going to Be Okay, Jay Simpson. This title has stuck with me as well because I really understand these words. This collection offers much needed insights into the effects of colonization on our bodies, our sexuality, and the land. Ariel Twist, the author of Disintegrate, Dissociate, had this to say about the collection. In this stunning debut, they speak truths to the complexities of the body, land, and memory through intimately structured, poignant cadence. This collection will leave you longing for more, and in the legacy of trans Indigenous literature, change lives. Beautiful collection. And next, this one is one that makes me cry. The only card in a deck of knives, Lauren Turner. This collection is just as Rachel McCrum said in Montreal Review of Books, unnerving and unsettling in the questions it poses, and deeply satisfying in the skill and discipline with which the poet sustains her interrogations. Both of those who have exerted their own agency over her history and of her own sense of self. And I think this is something that people living with chronic illnesses often struggle with, is their own sense of agency. So I thought it was brilliantly done, but also a very important thing that we need to learn and read about and hear about. And poetry touches us so deeply in such a different way than a lecture from someone about such things. This is why I love poetry so much. So thank you, Lauren. Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought, Betsy Warland. This collection of prose poems takes us on a journey around Stanley Park's Lost Lagoon. Darrell J. McLeod, author of Governor General Award-winning Mama Stash, offered this testimonial. A soliloquy on life and loss by a poet who has become attuned to the natural world, specifically the microcosm of Lost Lagoon in Vancouver and its ecosystem. Warland's Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought, is an artistic affirmation of the sacred but humble space humans occupy in the cosmos and the magical reciprocity of a human can establish with the flora, fauna, and physical world around her. Lost Lagoon, Lost in Thought is a stunningly beautiful work, and I agree with this assessment wholeheartedly. I really love the way in which this collection uses the human as the narrator, and human with a capital H, and the way in which the human interacts with the world around them. It's